I can't see anything! Keep doing what you're doing!
The red line has not just been crossed, it has been completely and violently obliterated. In the dead of night, an encrypted flash message tore through the highest levels of the Pentagon, carrying an order so absolutely unprecedented that the Middle East has not seen anything like it in over 2 decades. Tehran has unleashed a coordinated multi-front wave of ballistic missiles targeting Allied installations, while simultaneously directing its shadow proxies to swarm American outposts across the desert. With a global economic jugular, the Strait of Hormuz, under existential threat, the United States National Security Council has made a historic unanimous decision. They are done playing defensive games. Washington is not sending a warning, it is sending an army. A staggering 20,000 elite combat-ready American troops have just been handed a terrifyingly brief 72-hour deadline to pack up, load out, and put boots on the sand. The ultimate countdown to war has officially begun. Across heavily fortified military installations spanning from the continental United States to Allied bases in Europe, high-ranking unit commanders received the flash message simultaneously. This was not a routine training drill. This was a definitive lethal call to arms. Specialized units sitting at a heightened state of readiness were suddenly flooded with highly classified movement instructions. They received specific aircraft tail numbers, designated departure airfields, extensive personnel manifests, and heavy equipment load plans. Every complex logistical maneuver relentlessly pre-planned for months was now being executed in real time. Every single soldier, whether sleeping in their barracks, executing field maneuvers, or enjoying a rare weekend pass, was frantically recalled to active duty. Within the very first hour of the alert, every unit listed on the primary deployment roster was actively assembling. Inside the chaotic staging areas, heavy canvas duffel bags were rapidly stuffed with tactical gear while combat rucksacks were loaded to the absolute brim. Highly disciplined troops systematically funneled through the heavily guarded armories, meticulously drawing their assigned assault rifles as armorers frantically recorded every single serial number. Steel magazines were issued by the dozen. Live ammunition was officially signed for, and advanced Kevlar body armor was tightly fitted. These battle-hardened soldiers had executed this exact routine countless times in training, but the terrifying difference this time was the destination printed on their classified movement orders. Nobody was given a definitive return date. Because the deployment timeline stated the mission was indefinite, the American warfighters packed their gear accordingly. Down at the sprawling motor pools, specialized vehicle crews aggressively prepared their mechanized equipment. Armored troop carriers and infantry fighting vehicles were violently ripped out of hardened storage bunkers and perfectly lined up on concrete lots. Diesel engines were fired up and run through extensive warm-up cycles, while specialized mechanics ran advanced digital diagnostic checks on every integrated weapon system. Encrypted communication radios were actively tested, and external weapon mounts were meticulously inspected. Crates of heavy caliber ammunition were carefully loaded and strapped down. These multi-ton war machines were being meticulously prepped to be driven directly up the steep loading ramps of C-17 aircraft and heavily chained to reinforced cargo decks for a long intercontinental flight. The legendary 82nd Airborne Division was among the very first elite units ordered to mobilize. These are the absolute rapid deployment specialists of the United States military, explicitly trained to parachute into any hostile landing zone on planet Earth within 18 hours of receiving a sudden alert. At Fort Bragg, seasoned paratroopers frantically drew their specialized jumping equipment from the rigger sheds. They grabbed static line parachutes, critical reserve chutes, deployment bags, and padded weapons cases, prepared for immediate violent air delivery. The elite paratroopers flawlessly rigged their complex equipment, completed their mandatory jump manifest cards, formed up in highly disciplined tactical sticks, and began aggressively boarding the C-17 sitting on the flight line with their jet engines already screaming. At the busy departure airfield, the sheer mind-boggling scale of the operation was undeniably visible. The sprawling flight line was completely lined with giant C-17 Globemaster III aircraft, stretching as far as the human eye could possibly see. Every single massive cargo plane was actively being loaded simultaneously. Some took on hundreds of heavily armed troops, while others were meticulously loaded with armored vehicles, vital logistical equipment, pallets of explosive ammunition, giant rubber fuel bladders, critical medical supplies, and advanced satellite communications equipment in a steady rotation. Highly trained loadmasters carefully walked the belly of each aircraft, double-checking complex weight and balance calculations before the massive rear hydraulic ramps finally closed shut. One by one, the heavy aircraft taxied to the main runway and roared into the dark sky. The exact second one plane took off, the next was already taxiing into launch position. The very first wave of C-17s arrived at the designated forward operating base in the highly contested Middle Eastern region after a grueling 12-hour intercontinental flight. The hydraulic cargo ramps dropped wide open before the aircraft had even fully stopped rolling down the runway, allowing combat-ready soldiers to file out immediately into the blistering desert heat. Armored vehicles were rapidly unchained and driven straight off the cargo decks, while equipment pallets were quickly pulled out by heavy military forklifts. Base personnel frantically directed each military element to its newly assigned staging area. Incredibly, the massive transport planes did not even shut down their engines. They were rapidly refueled while running, turning right around to fly straight back across the ocean to pick up the exact next load, making multiple exhausting round trips. Alongside the massive C-17 airlift, heavily armed Black Hawk and CH-53 Sea Stallion helicopters began aggressively moving combat troops from the main staging base to remote, highly dangerous forward positions completely inaccessible by conventional road networks. The transport helicopters flew incredibly low over the unforgiving desert terrain in tight combat formations, navigating expertly to pre-planned landing zones where soldiers exited immediately and rushed off the pad. Multiple synchronized helicopter flights ran simultaneously across various combat sectors, populating remote forward fighting positions at a blistering pace. High above the chaotic battlefield, the elite paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne finally reached their designated drop zone. The C-17s perfectly lined up on the exact drop axis. The side jump doors opened, the jumpmaster checked the wind, and the red light instantly turned green. Paratroopers aggressively exited the speeding aircraft in rapid, violent succession until the plane was empty. The drop zone below rapidly filled with hundreds of open parachutes descending silently through the hostile sky. Upon hitting the dirt, the paratroopers violently collapsed their chutes, uncased their weapons, and seamlessly formed up, moving directly toward their assigned combat objective. Back at the main forward operating base, the massive buildup rapidly accelerated as aircraft continually arrived in endless deafening waves. The military base operating at normal garrison levels just 48 hours ago was now handling the equivalent of a small city's worth of incoming forces every few hours. Overwhelmed base operations personnel desperately directed the massive flow of incoming units as sprawling, heavily fortified tent cities went up across the adjacent open desert ground. Exhausted soldiers drove steel stakes and thick tent fabric into the blistering heat, making the massive camp completely functional before the last stakes were even driven into the sand. Highly trained communication specialists were among the absolute first units to be fully operational. Advanced satellite antenna arrays went up within hours of landing, each perfectly aligned with the orbital network. Secure voice circuits were instantly established with the central command post, and the highly encrypted tactical internet was seamlessly connected. The remote forward positions were completely integrated into the broader operational network before physical fighting positions were even completed. As dedicated signals, teams frantically ran miles of fiber optic cable. The heavily armed infantry units arriving at forward positions immediately began establishing impenetrable overlapping defensive perimeters. Crew-served weapons were strategically set up covering the most likely enemy approach routes, while lethal machine gun teams carefully identified their primary and alternate firing positions. Practicing their crossfire arcs, specialized mortar teams rapidly set up explosive launch tubes, laid heavy base plates, and registered precise firing data. Advanced anti-tank missile teams positioned highly lethal weapon systems at elevated ground, securing perfectly clear fields of fire. Every single fighting position was tied into the digital communication network before the tactical team considered itself ready to repel an assault. At the massive main airfield, terrifying B-52 Stratofortress heavy bombers taxied to designated parking positions for exhaustive pre-mission servicing. The aircraft were rapidly refueled while specialized aviation weapons teams loaded deadly, precision-guided conventional air-launched cruise missiles onto underwing pylons. Meanwhile, highly elite sniper teams quietly moved out from the forward fighting positions to establish hidden, elevated observation posts on the high ground, overlooking the vast surrounding area. These deadly two-man teams carried specialized long-range sniper rifles, high-powered spotting scopes, laser rangefinders, and tactical supplies for extended observation periods. Moving silently like ghosts before first light, they successfully set up to begin systematically observing the hostile desert terrain below. Every single road, dirt track, and potential enemy approach route was heavily watched. Every enemy movement was logged and instantly reported back to command, serving as an invisible early warning network. On the third day of the deployment, the full combat force is officially in position. 20,000 heavily armed American troops are perfectly distributed across forward operating bases and tactical fighting positions around the entire region. Two massive aircraft carrier strike groups hold their dominant lethal positions in the Persian Gulf, while B-52 bombers sit fully armed on high alert. High-ranking commanders aggressively review operational plans and confirm highly classified target packages. Triggers for massive offensive action are firmly established. The terrifying B-52 bombers begin their very first combat sortie, taxiing heavily to the main runway threshold. Each colossal aircraft lines up, runs up its 8 engines, and begins its heavy, deafening takeoff roll. The aircraft lifts off heavily loaded with precision weapons, climbing slowly and turning ominously onto its combat heading. Fighter escort packages from the carrier air wings are already airborne, moving to rendezvous with the heavy bombers. Down on the ground, armed infantry units receive the final undeniable order to move. Armored vehicle, columns form up tightly on the dusty roads, while synchronized helicopter lifts move infantry elements to remote tactical positions. The massive, unstoppable American combat force is now in violent motion across multiple strategic axes simultaneously. The unprecedented build-up phase is officially complete and the operation has successfully moved from rapid preparation to absolute devastating execution.